Is this some kind of joke? Someone get this relic out of my banquet hall before the general arrives. The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of arrogant authority that only a young officer who'd never seen real conflict could muster. Captain Hayes stood with his hands on his hips, his freshly pressed uniform practically gleaming under the chandeliers. His polished boots reflected the meticulous work of the man he was addressing. That man was Joseph. To Hayes, and to nearly everyone else on the base, he was just the janitor. An old man, probably pushing 90, with a back bent from decades of pushing a mop and a face etched with the kind of deep lines that time carves into the forgotten. He was standing by the regimental honor wall, his gnarled hand gently polishing the brass nameplate of a fallen soldier. He didn't flinch at the captain's tone. He simply continued his circular motion, his breathing slow and steady. "Did you hear me, old-timer?" Hayes snapped, taking a step closer. A few junior lieutenants flanking him snickered. "This is the annual 75th Ranger Regiment reunion dinner. It's for warriors, not custodial staff. We have standards." Joseph finished his task, the brass plate now shining like a small sun. He turned slowly, his movements deliberate, economical. His eyes, clear in the color of a winter sky, met the captain's. They held no fear, no anger, not even annoyance. They held a profound, unsettling calm, an ancient stillness that made the young captain's bravado feel cheap and loud. "The brass was tarnished," Joseph said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "It's important to see their names clearly." Hayes scoffed, a dismissive sound that echoed slightly in the vast, empty hall. "Their names are for their brothers in arms to see, not for you. Now I'm giving you one last chance to pack up your little cart and disappear before I call the MPs and have you escorted off the premises." It was then that a truly cruel idea sparked in the captain's mind. He exchanged a conspiratorial grin with one of his lieutenants. The humiliation of simply kicking the old man out wasn't enough. He wanted to make an example of him, to create a story his men would tell for weeks. "Actually," Hayes said, his tone shifting to one of mock sincerity, "I've had a change of heart. You seem to care so much about this regiment. In fact, you should come tonight, as our guest." The lieutenants stifled their laughter. The prank was taking shape. They would invite the janitor. They'd sit him at a table in the back and let him see what real soldiers looked like. It would be a running joke for the entire evening, a mascot of decrepitude to highlight their own youthful vitality. Hayes pulled a crisp, embossed invitation from his breast pocket, a spare for a last-minute dignitary. He strode over to Joseph and thrust it into his hand. "Here, be here at 1900 hours. Don't be late. There's even a dress code, but I suppose we can make an exception for you." Joseph looked down at the elegant card in his rough, calloused hand. His fingers, which had field-stripped rifles in monsoon rains and held dying friends, traced the raised regimental crest. He didn't look up. He simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you, Captain." He turned, collected his cart with the squeaky wheel, and began to slowly push it toward the service exit. His acceptance, his utter lack of reaction, was not what Hayes had expected. He'd wanted pleading, or confusion, or anger. Instead, the old man's quiet dignity felt like a silent rebuke, and it infuriated him. Watching from across the hall, arranging table settings, was a young private named Davis. He'd seen the whole exchange. He felt a knot of shame tighten in his stomach. He'd been on the base for 6 months and saw Joseph every day. The old man was always the first one in and the last one out. He never spoke much, but he always had a quiet nod for the enlisted men. There was something about him, a weight and a gravity that didn't fit the worn-out coveralls he wore. Private Davis watched him disappear through the door and couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Hayes had just made a terrible, terrible mistake. The evening arrived, and the banquet hall was transformed. It buzzed with the energy of heroes. Men with scars on their faces and steel in their spines filled the room, their dress uniforms adorned with rows of colorful ribbons telling stories of valor from Panama to Afghanistan. Laughter and booming stories of past glories filled the air. Captain Hayes was in his element, holding court near the head table, a smug smile plastered on his face. "Keep an eye on the main entrance," he told his circle of officers. "Our special guest should be arriving any minute. I want to give him a proper warrior's welcome." They all chuckled, imagining the pathetic sight of the old janitor shuffling in, completely out of place. At precisely 1900 hours, the main doors opened. A figure stood silhouetted against the fading evening light. It was Joseph. But it was not the janitor they knew. He was wearing a simple, dark suit. It was old, the cut of the fabric decades out of style, but it was immaculately clean and perfectly pressed. He walked with the same slow, deliberate pace, but his back seemed straighter, his shoulders less stooped. He wasn't carrying a mop or a bucket. He was carrying the weight of history. But it was the object around his neck that silenced the nearest tables. Hanging from a pale blue, star-spangled ribbon was a single, 5-pointed golden star. It was an award so rare, so sacred, that most soldiers only ever saw it in a museum display case or a history book. The Medal of Honor. A ripple of confusion spread through the room. Some of the younger soldiers, who'd never seen one in person, assumed it had to be a replica, a pathetic attempt by a confused old man to feel important. The whispers started. "Is that real? Who is that guy?" Hayes saw him. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a flash of disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. The audacity! This senile old fool had shown up wearing the nation's highest award for valor. It was a disgusting insult. It was stolen valor, plain and simple. "You have got to be kidding me," Hayes seethed, his voice low and dangerous. He started striding toward Joseph, his knuckles white. "This is what I'm talking about. The absolute disrespect." As Joseph stepped further into the hall, the sound of the string quartet playing a patriotic medley and the clinking of champagne flutes seemed to fade away. For him, another sound was rising, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of Huey helicopter blades. The air, thick with the scent of expensive cologne and roasted duck, was suddenly replaced by the smell of cordite, jet fuel, and the metallic tang of blood. The polished floor beneath his feet became slick, muddy jungle ground. Flashback. A hot, suffocating darkness. The Aishau Valley, 1968. He wasn't Joseph the janitor. He was a Staff Sergeant Chen, leading a 12-man Special Forces team on a reconnaissance mission deep in enemy territory. They'd been compromised. An entire NVA battalion was closing in on their position. The world had erupted into a storm of green tracers and concussive explosions. Radio calls were screams of panic. "Serpent 6, we are pinned down, taking heavy fire from all sides. We have multiple KIAs. He felt the familiar kick of his Car 15 against his shoulder. He was moving, always moving from one shattered tree to another, directing fire, dragging wounded men back into their small, desperate perimeter. A mortar round landed 10 feet away and the world went white and silent for a moment. When his hearing returned, it was to the sound of screaming. Young Corporal Peterson was down, his leg shredded. Another man, Specialist Gregg, lay motionless beside him. Protocol was clear: fall back to the extraction point. But leaving men behind was not in his DNA. "Cover me!" he roared over the din. He scrambled out into the kill zone, the ground around him erupting in puffs of dirt as bullets sought his life. He reached Peterson, hauled the much larger man onto his shoulders, and began the agonizing crawl back to cover. The weight was immense, a burning fire in his lungs and legs, but he didn't stop. He got him back, applied a tourniquet with practiced efficiency, and then went back out. He went back for Gregg, knowing it was probably too late, but you never left a man. He returned with the body, laying him gently next to the others. For 6 hours, he commanded the defense. He redistributed ammunition from the fallen. He called in airstrikes so close they could feel the heat of the napalm. He crawled from foxhole to foxhole, offering a steady word, a confident look, single-handedly holding the perimeter together. When the rescue choppers finally arrived, he refused to board. He stood on the landing skid, providing cover fire as his wounded men were loaded. He was the last one on, only climbing in after he had personally accounted for every man, living and dead. Back in the banquet hall, Captain Hayes had reached him. His face was a mask of furious indignation. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the entire room. He pointed a trembling finger at the medal. "That is not a toy. That is not a costume piece. You are a disgrace to every person in this uniform. Stolen valor is a federal offense, old man. I'm going to personally rip that disgusting fake off your neck and have you thrown in the brig." He reached out, his fingers poised to snatch the sacred ribbon. Joseph didn't flinch. His clear eyes were distant, still seeing the ghosts of a jungle valley half a world away. He simply said, his voice raspy with memory, "They gave it to me, a long time ago." Private Davis, standing near the back, felt his blood run cold. He'd been studying the history of the regiment, memorizing the citations of its greatest heroes. He'd seen that face before, in a grainy, black-and-white photograph in an old archive file. A file about a classified Mac v. SOG operation. A hero whose records were sealed for almost 40 years. His mind screamed the name, but his throat was locked in awe and horror. He couldn't speak. He could only watch as Captain Hayes was about to commit an act of unforgivable sacrilege. Just as the captain's fingers were about to touch the ribbon, a voice boomed from the entrance, cutting through the tension like a thunderclap. "Captain Hayes, stand down." The command was absolute, imbued with a power that vibrated through the very floorboards. Every soldier in the room, from the lowest private to the colonels at the head tables, instinctively snapped to attention, their bodies reacting to a lifetime of training. Standing in the doorway was General Wallace, a 4-star legend, the guest of honor for the evening. His face was grim, his eyes like chips of granite. He strode into the room, his presence sucking all the air out of it. He didn't look at Hayes, he didn't look at anyone. His gaze was fixed solely on the old man in the dated suit. General Wallace marched directly to Joseph, stopping precisely 1 foot in front of him. He drew himself up to his full height and executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his entire 40-year career. It was a salute of utter, unconditional respect. A salute a general gives not to a subordinate, but to a superior. "Sergeant Major Chen?" The general's voice was thick with emotion. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a metal drop. Captain Hayes froze, his hand hovering in midair. His face, which had been red with anger, drained of all color, leaving a pasty, sickly white. "Sergeant Major? Sir?" The words didn't compute. This was the janitor, the old relic. General Wallace slowly lowered his salute, but kept his eyes locked on Joseph's. He then turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the stunned audience before landing, with the force of a physical blow, on Captain Hayes. "Captain," the general said, his voice deceptively calm, "do you have any idea who you were about to assault?" Hayes stammered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. General, he was wearing I thought it was fake, sir." "You thought," the general repeated, the words dripping with contempt. "You didn't know. You saw an old man in a simple suit, and you assumed. You assumed he was less than you. You assumed he was nobody." He turned back to the room. "Let me educate you all. You think you're in a room full of heroes tonight? You are. but none more so than the man standing before you. He placed a hand on Joseph's shoulder. This is Sergeant Major Joseph Chen. In 1968, as a staff sergeant, his Green Beret team was ambushed and nearly overrun in the A Shao Valley. For 6 hours, he exposed himself to constant withering enemy fire to rescue his wounded comrades, organize a defense, and repel an enemy force that outnumbered his team 50-1. He personally saved the lives of 8 men that day. He refused evacuation until every single one of his men, living and dead, was aboard the last helicopter. He was the last man out. The general's voice grew stronger, resonating with a righteous anger. His actions were so significant, and the nature of his mission so highly classified, that his Medal of Honor citation was sealed for nearly 4 decades. He asked for no parades. He sought no fame. When he retired, he could have done anything. Instead, he chose to come here. He took a job as a janitor on this very base because he wanted to be close to soldiers. He wanted to quietly serve, to watch over the next generation, to make sure the memorials of his fallen brothers were always clean. He looked directly at Hayes, his eyes burning with a cold fire. You invited this man here to be your punchline, Captain. You wanted to mock him. You stood in the presence of living history, of a legend who embodies every value this regiment purports to hold dear, and all you saw was a janitor. The weight of the general's words crushed Captain Hayes. Humiliation washed over him in a sickening wave. He looked at Joseph, at the quiet old man who had endured his taunts with unshakable grace, and he finally saw him. He saw the hero beneath the wrinkles, the warrior behind the weary eyes. His own arrogance, his own foolishness, was a gaping wound for all to see. "Sir," Hayes whispered, his voice cracking, "Sergeant Major, I'm so sorry. There are no words?" He expected a reprimand. He expected to be dressed down, perhaps even to have his career ended on the spot, but Joseph simply raised a hand, the same gnarled hand that had polished the brass plaque. He placed it gently on the captain's trembling shoulder. The touch was surprisingly firm. "It's all right, son," Joseph said, his voice kind. "Respect isn't about the uniform you wear on the outside, it's about the character you build on the inside. It has to be earned. Every day, you'll learn." That quiet act of forgiveness was more powerful than any punishment. It was a lesson in grace delivered by a man who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen to embody its best. A single soldier in the back began to clap, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted. The applause was deafening, a thunderous wave of respect and awe. Every soldier, from the youngest private to the oldest veteran, was on their feet, their applause directed at the unassuming man in the old suit. They formed a line, one by one, to shake his hand, to thank him, to simply be in his presence. Captain Hayes stood apart, his head bowed in shame, watching as the man he had tried to humiliate was finally given the honor he had never asked for. His world had been turned upside down. He had been taught a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life, that the measure of a man is not found in his rank or his appearance, but in the quiet courage of his heart. Later that night, as the event wound down, Hayes approached Joseph again, this time with a humility he had never known. "Sergeant Major," he began, "what you did, what you said, I don't deserve your forgiveness." Joseph looked at him, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving, Captain. It's about letting go. War teaches you that. You hold on to hate and it becomes a weight you can't carry. You learn to put it down. You did a foolish thing, but you're not a bad man. You have the chance to be a good leader. Don't waste it." The old hero's wisdom settled over the young officer, a final, profound lesson on a night of revelation. The greatest strength is not in the power to command, but in the grace to forgive. The deepest honor is not in the medals you display, but in the quiet service you render when no one is watching. Joseph Chen, the janitor, the hero, had served his country on the battlefield, and he was still serving it, one polished plaque and one unchanged heart at a time. This story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every single day. They're not always in uniform or on television. They are the quiet, unassuming people who have lived lives of incredible sacrifice and ask for nothing in return. They are our parents, our grandparents, our neighbors. The next time you see an elderly person, remember to look past the wrinkles and the slow steps. Look into their eyes. You might just see a hero looking back at you. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that honor the hidden heroes all around us.